Terry Ryder from Hotspotting with this week's edition of the Good News Bulletin. And as always, there's no shortage of positive and uplifting news to talk about it. It's just that you won't be reading about it in mainstream news media, which continues to be focused on assaulting you with everything negative they can find. Now, amongst the good news, a new survey has found that the home buying intentions of Australians have risen as the pandemic restrictions have generally eased in most parts of Australia. They're now close to the level seen in March, before the full impact of COVID-19 was felt on consumer sentiment. The Commonwealth Bank's latest Household Spending Intentions Index shows a 6% rise in home buying intentions last month after falling in the early part of the COVID-19 restrictions. CBA's chief economist, Stephen Halmarick, says the recovery in the past month coincided with the partial reopening of the Australian economy. He also says, rather strangely, that the revival was inspired by record low interest rates. This is fairly typical nonsense from economists who don't understand real estate market dynamics. We've had record low interest rates for a long time and they haven't changed recently. So why would the level of interest rates suddenly inspire people to want to buy real estate when they didn't in April or May? And the answer is that the improved sentiment has nothing to do with interest rates. It's about the easing of restrictions, not including Melbourne obviously, and the general revival and consumer confidence as more and more people have reopened businesses and more people have gone back to work. Stephen Halmarick may be the chief economist of the Commonwealth Bank, but he clearly knows very little about real estate markets and what drives them. And in that regard, he has a lot in common with most of the chattering economists who clog up the airways with their misinformation and their inaccurate predictions. Now, the Commonwealth Government's new home buyer grant has triggered what some reports have termed a land rush, with demand for vacant residential land, surging in the last 2 months. According to figures from realestate.com.au, inquiries with real estate agents about land sales rose by nearly 60% in the month following the announcement of the Home Builder Scheme, which provides a grant of $25,000 to people building a new home. First home buyers in particular have responded strongly to this, coupled with other incentives available from federal and state governments. It's a great time to be a first home buyer in Australia, as long as you've got a secure job, of course, with so much government assistance around, plus, of course, cheap finance. The realestate.com.au figures suggest that inquiries from new buyers looking for vacant land rose nearly 180% compared to homeowners rising by 35% and investors just 26%. And REA Group Director of Economic Research Cameron Cusher says it's obviously going to be very positive for the construction sector. But one thing, the question remains about how many of these young buyers will be able to follow through. Will they be able to get the finance they need, for example? Hopefully most of them will, but some of them have just put up a small deposit bond and may not have the capacity to go through with the bigger deal when the time comes. There's a lot of government incentives for people to invest in real estate at the moment, and the New South Wales state government has just provided yet another boost. It says it will temporarily abolish stamp duty on new homes worth less than $800,000 for first home buyers. It's all about boosting construction and creating jobs in difficult times. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian says she expects 6,000 first home buyers will benefit from the changes because it will save them many thousands of dollars they would otherwise pay in stamp duty. And she says it will get more keys into more front doors of more new homes. It will also boost housing construction across New South Wales and provide jobs in the building industry at a time when we need them more than ever before. Under the changes, the threshold for stamp duty being charged on new homes for first home buyers will increase from the current $650,000 to $800,000. The stamp duty threshold on vacant land will also rise from $350,000 to $400,000 and will phase out at $500,000. The changes to the threshold will apply only to newly built homes and vacant land, not to existing homes, and will last for 12 months starting on 1 August. The data published by Domain indicates that property prices are rising across much of regional Australia. The regions are generally doing a lot better in the pandemic than the biggest capital cities, and many regional markets are thriving at the moment. And according to the latest Domain House Price Report, median dwelling values, that's combining both houses and units, for regional Australia edged up slightly over the June quarter, but individual markets have done much better than that. Some regional areas in Tasmania, for example, have had annual price rises of 20% or more, and there have been double-digit annual price rises in regional centres in Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, and also South Australia. As an example, the Huon Valley in Tasmania has risen 22%, and Brighton, near Hobart, is up 20%. In New South Wales, Byron Bay has increased 21%, and way out west Parkes has risen 18%. In Victoria, local government areas close to Melbourne, like Baw Baw, which includes Warragul and Druin, the Central Goldfields and the Golden Plains local government area, have all risen 10, 12, 15% in the last year. And there have been large increases in some of the mining-related areas of Queensland, with rises above 20% in some cases. Not that I'm suggesting that you rush out and buy in such locations, because they are high risk and very volatile markets. But the central message is that house prices are growing in many parts of regional Australia. And you're not hearing much about it in the news media because they're obsessed with Sydney and Melbourne. And I always like to remind people that there are 17 million Australians who don't live in Sydney and Melbourne, but we don't hear much about them or about their property markets. Now, research conducted by Propertyology, which is a really good source of quality information about real estate, has shown that only 4 out of the 52 biggest Australian cities and towns has a residential vacancy rate of 3% or higher. That means that the vast majority have very low vacancies, and that means rents are likely to rise. And this confirms data on vacancies from another good source, SQM Research, which reported that vacancies fell in 7 of the 8 capital cities during June, and that most of the major cities now have vacancy rates well under 2%. Simon Presley of Propertyology suggests that Australia has a serious shortage of rental properties. Presley says, "The only thing currently preventing an official declaration of an Australian rental crisis is the sedation effect of the coronavirus containment measures." And he says, "Mark my words, sharp rent price rises are inevitable." According to his research, 39 out of the 52 largest towns and cities in Australia, 75% of them, have an undersupply of properties, while 9 locations have a balanced market and just 4 are oversupplied. Oversupplied means a vacancy rate above 3%, and Sydney currently is the only capital city in that category. So what's causing this shortage? Presley says that mum and dad property investors haven't been buying much lately, whereas home buyers have been very busy. And he says that this is going to cause rents to rise. Presley says large parts of Australia have seen several consecutive years of low volumes of properties purchased by investors, and that's where the rental supply comes from. As local demand continues to rise, the pressure continues to push rents and yields higher. And Presley also says this week, the principal of a property management business told our buyers agents that they have only 9 vacancies among a rent roll of 1,700 properties. And this situation is not unusual for most of Australia. And I can confirm most of that. Every day I'm looking at vacancy rates in different locations around Australia, and often a local area will have vacancies of just 1% or 1.5%, sometimes less than 1%. Many regional cities are in this category, and so too are some of the smaller capital cities, including Adelaide, Hobart and Canberra, and many parts of Perth and Brisbane also have low vacancies. Now, one of the things that's happening out there is that more and more Australians are opting to fix their mortgage rates. The Commonwealth Bank says the portion of borrowers deciding to lock in rates at the current levels has nearly tripled recently to a record high 40% of borrowers. This major shift in borrowing patterns at the nation's largest home lender is expected to be matched across the sector, because fixed rates are often lower at present than the variable rates are. So with rates at record lows, many homeowners are clearly seeking security and knowing in advance how much they will have to pay each month in the years ahead. And Stephen Halmarick, the chief economist at the Commonwealth Bank I mentioned earlier, says it's more than a spike in fixed rate applications. It's deeper than that. There is an expectation that monetary policy will be at their settings for some time to come. Fixed rate investors were still running at just 14% of all borrowers as recently as March, but now it's 40% of all borrowers. Now finally, the latest price data out today from SQM Research confirms what I reported earlier in this particular bulletin, and that is that markets in regional Australia are doing better than those in the bigger cities, generally speaking. SQM's weekly prices index shows that there was a small rise for both houses and apartments nationally in the past month, but a decline for capital cities, which means that the rises are happening regionally. The other thing today's figures from SQM Research shows is that prices remain considerably higher than they were a year ago, despite all the impacts of COVID-19. In annual terms, national house prices are up 7% and apartment prices are up 4.5%. All the capital cities except Darwin have house prices higher than they were a year ago. Sydney, despite recent falls, is still 10% higher than last year, and Melbourne remains 9% higher than a year ago. And in Hobart, house prices are still 12% higher than they were this time last year. And that's a good positive note on which to end this week's Good News Bulletin. Bye for now.